The Final Fantasy VII Remake is finally here. After 23 years since the original game's release, Final Fantasy VII Remake is available for fans worldwide to enjoy. I was a late bloomer to Final Fantasy VII. I didn't play the original until 2005, almost 8 years after its release. At that time, I had recently just played 10, and going back to the unnaturally blocky figures in 7 took a bit of an adjustment. But man, am I glad I stuck with it. I was completely enthralled by the game. Its story, its characters, its setting, and its music. It was one of the best, if not the best, game I've played, and it really left an everlasting impression to this day. Obviously then, I was one of the many people waiting with excitement for the game to release when it was announced. Bringing such a classic and massively defining piece of work to the modern system is ambitious to say the least, which is why I understand why this first game only takes place in the starting city of Midgar. But that payoff could be huge. Before I go any further, I want to give a spoiler warning for those who have not yet played Final Fantasy VII or its remake. I will be comparing the remake to the original to talk about specific plot elements and characters that make the remake what it is. Midgar is the city where Cloud's adventure begins. It's a massive city, so Square Enix has a lot of material to work with to create additional content to fill up the world. The original game's explorable areas in Midgar were not that large, and there weren't that many either, despite its massive size. Exploring Midgar in its entirety only took about 10 hours or so. In the remake, new levels are added, such as a couple of new research facilities and the Sector 7 ruins. All previous levels have also been greatly expanded upon, such as the Shinra building having a garage, and Reactor 5 including a whole undersection with a puzzle. It's a whole new experience, and so much attention has been made to recreating Midgar to its full potential. New characters were also added in to help give the game more depth and make Midgar feel alive. Characters like Marl give the Sector 7 slums a sense of community, as she seems like the tough yet loving mother figure that watches over the residents. This is especially apparent when she issues a stern warning to Cloud about if he ever hurt Tifa, who is like a granddaughter to her. The orphanage in Sector 5 is another good example, and reminded me of Cloud and Tifa helping orphans in the Final Fantasy VII movie, Advent Children. It was cool to see the kids look up to Cloud and carry those wooden buster swords around with them as they patrolled the town. The kids' teacher, Miss Folia, had great scenes as well, like when you catch her in the back alley of the Honeybee Inn dressed as one of their dancers. Gotta follow your dreams! Not only were new characters added, old characters were greatly expanded upon, giving them more depth to foster a stronger connection. Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie are excellent examples as they play a large part in the reactor missions. However, their roles were incredibly short in the original and they were very one-dimensional. After playing their part in the first few hours of the game, they were easily forgotten. The remake changes that by giving them more personality, which, granted, isn't hard since they had none to begin with, but Square Enix did a really good job here. Jessie is very flirty with Cloud and has a great backstory of wanting to become a dancer, but giving up her career to join Avalanche to fight for change. Wedge is a huge cat and food lover. He's jolly and adds a lot of lighthearted emotion to his scenes. He tries so hard to connect with Cloud, and it's pretty touching really. And lastly, Biggs seems like the cool responsible type of the group that keeps everyone focused. He was goal-oriented and felt like the senpai of the group. And let's not forget about the heroes of the story either. They're given the time to really grow on me again. Cloud's cold attitude towards everything and everyone in the beginning was still done well and true to the source material in the original game. But the remake takes much more care to show his growth from that of coldness to him starting to come out of his shell, especially with his friends. Moments like saying he'll charge for rebuilding 7th Heaven, or offering a 3-guild extermination special to the orphans were great moments that show some important turning points for Cloud. Aerith is another character whose development was done well. She has a lot of burdens and hardships on her, yet she always shows her cheerfulness and sometimes playfulness, especially around Cloud. It's always the ones who have gone through the most to show this kind of positivity, and it was something that stood out for me when seeing her character. Aerith and Tifa's relationship is also stronger, where they basically became best friends overnight. It was cool to see that kind of relationship between the two, even though they have the same love interest. Side quests were spread out among a few chapters to help further build the story and the world of Midgar. Additional characters that held no importance to the main story were introduced during this time and helped enrich the world. The extermination request from the orphans mentioned earlier is one of such quests. One of my favorites was the Angel of the Slum, who takes inspiration from the gentleman thief trope, leaving calling cards at the scene of the crime and stealing from the corrupt. It's also probably because I just finished playing Persona 5 Royal not too long ago, and it reminds me of that. Then there is also Johnny, a character that could be found in the world of the original game, but didn't have a name and only a few lines of dialogue. They expanded on this character and he had some great interactions with Big Bro Cloud and the rest of the gang. All these characters in the new areas in Midgar helped build a lively world, and as a result created the foundation for a strong story. A lot of it has been expanded upon from what I know of the original game to make the events more meaningful. For instance, the bombing of Reactor 1 had a lot more impact because it showed the devastation Avalanche caused, which made them question themselves and their actions. As Cloud walked through the streets, people could be seen mourning over their losses, whereas in the original, people were just kind of running around in a panic, which conveys a different kind of feeling. Another great example is the train graveyard, which has some light lore surrounding it in the original, but was otherwise just another normal, uneventful level you went through without much thought. However, in the remake, it wasn't as easy as just pushing around a few train carts to get back to Sector 7. Cloud gets to experience firsthand why it's called the train graveyard and how the rumors of it being haunted came about. However, for all the great things about the story, there are also a few things I didn't like about it. It takes a different direction than what I had anticipated it to be. I expected the story to be a retelling of the original Final Fantasy VII, but with much greater detail in the characters and of the world. And it does that. However, as I continued to play, everything that was familiar started to become more and more foreign. Big key story elements happened, though in a much different way where it's no longer the same story. It's not a bad thing per se, but it's like when you order onion rings but get french fries instead. They're both good, but you were looking forward to the onion rings. The game's storytelling is literally changing what I know of Final Fantasy VII, and if the ending is what I think it is, there's no telling what could happen in the subsequent games to come. I understand that they need to bring something new to the table and have surprises for returning players, but I'm wary about this new direction they're heading in. Whispers are introduced in the remake, and it's the plot device I didn't like. These are the ghostly enemies that keep the characters moving toward their fate as we know it to be. Every time something happened that was not in line with what happened in the original game, the Whispers would intervene and set things back on track. It made the story feel unnaturally forced. For instance, Cloud wasn't going to be a part of the Reactor 5 mission, but just kidding, Whispers are here to change that, and now he is. One of the themes that stems from this is fighting against destiny, or forging your own path, which I'm not totally on board with. All the different scenes that I thought were foreshadowing support the idea that the characters will know what's going to happen in the future and will try to stop it. Still, it's too early to write off what was done here entirely, as there are still tons of questions left to be answered, and this was just the prologue. I'm interested to see where Cloud will go from here and how the new characters introduced later will play into all of this. I'm definitely going into future releases with a different perspective on the story though, one that views the events that happens as a new story while touching on key moments in the original. And with that, I think I've spent enough time talking about the story, so let's move on to combat. It's completely different from the original, opting to use action combat instead of turn-based combat. The ATB gauge is still present though, and slowly builds up automatically in combat. By attacking and blocking, the gauge will build up faster. Once the bar is filled, it can be spent to perform other actions such as casting spells or using skills and items. There is also a difficulty called Classic to try and give players the feeling of turn-based combat who may still want that experience. On this difficulty, you don't have to worry about attacking, blocking, or dodging, as that's done automatically. This is how it tries to mimic turn-based combat, by allowing the action components to be ignored and have the focus solely be on using the ATB gauge. Except that it's not really the same. Enemies die pretty fast due to the difficulty being set to easy, which causes battles to end rather quickly and in a boring way. Sometimes you don't have to do anything, or sometimes the fight will end with just one triple slash. Unfortunately for those who want more of a classic mode, the remake's combat can't reach its full potential unless it's played on normal or hard for those who are looking for more of a challenge. The action combat is done very well and the controls feel great, but that can only be taken advantage of on non-easy difficulty since there will be a lot of mechanics that can't be ignored. it requires attention to be paid to what the enemy does and to exploit their weaknesses. Otherwise, it probably won't end too well. This is especially true during boss fights, but can also apply to weaker trash mobs like the Shock Trooper or the Heli Trooper. Take it from someone who likes to button mash and ignore what the enemy is doing. Dodging is also something that works a bit differently, but not in a bad way. It doesn't seem like it has any invincibility frames, which I'm not used to, so I'm still trying to dodge out of an attack rather than dodge out before the attack starts. Blocking and dodging are essential in combat and play an important role in not only keeping you alive, but filling up your ATB gauge to use stronger abilities. All the actions have a purpose and are actually useful, whereas in other games, usually it's not a big deal to ignore some buttons. Each character also plays very differently from each other, which is nice. Everyone felt useful and had their own quirks. Cloud was my go-to as a more balanced character, but did the most damage with a bigger area of attack. His stance switches were fun to use and were useful for stealing turns from enemies, since if I timed them right, I would get a counterattack and get to continue my combo. Tifa was cool, but I didn't like using her too much, as she only focused on single target damage, though she does have some longer and cooler combos. Aerith was the mage, and I used Barret as a ranger. Red 13 is unfortunately unplayable and is controlled by the AI in combat, so I'm looking forward to seeing how he works in the next game. Combat is a spectacle to behold with his super flashy and great visual effects. When playing as Cloud, all of his slashes have a spark effect that comes out in the direction he's swinging, making it great to look at. On the other hand, Tifa has sort of a poof effect as if she was punching a dusty sandbag, but it looks better than what I'm describing. Similarly, Aerith and Barret are also cool to see in combat with their unique fighting style. Limit breaks though are my favorite, with the character zoom in followed by an animation worthy of such prowess and damage. Can't wait to see what Omni Slash looks like. Final Fantasy VII Remake has gone through a lot of changes, and the music is no exception. The Final Fantasy series has some amazing music tracks, and Final Fantasy VII keeps to this trend. Tracks I remember listening to as I played through the original can be heard in higher definition and quality. Some tracks even had some variations, such as Tifa's theme during the Don Corneo rescue, which was awesome to hear. It fit the kind of playfulness of the characters as they break out of captivity and kick ass at the same time. The battle themes are other tracks that sounded great and got me into the moment, especially during boss fights. The new ending track, Hollow, is one of my two favorites, with the other being the bandit theme heard on the highway or while fighting Beck's crew. Hollow is played during the last moments of the game, as the sky gets dark and it begins to rain on the barren wasteland, while Cloud and crew set off on their next adventure. Then the screen shifts off to the credits, all while this song is playing. It fit the moment so well and gave the scene so much emotion. It was perfect. It's clear that Final Fantasy VII Remake has an identity of its own, differentiating itself from its source material, not only with combat, but with the story as well. I've seen some players questioning whether or not the original Final Fantasy VII will still have a place with the remake out. At the time, I believed that it still would, even if the remake was basically the same game but with better graphics. After playing the remake, I now believe it's even more important than before to still remember and play the original. It gives a completely different viewpoint of events, characters, and of the world. It also gives a look into what the early JRPGs using 3D models were like, which I think is important to remember. The next release for the remake will most likely have very different events that play out from the original, bringing in new surprises and moments. I'll constantly be comparing it to the original though, which still holds a special place in my heart. The original story was done magnificently, where every turn, twist, and moment had a very real emotional impact. It'll be interesting to see whether or not the remake can make that happen again to the same degree.